Welcome to Nature Calls, conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Hosts Jean and Tim, along with team members Teresa and Linda, are master gardener volunteers for New York's Columbia and Greene counties. So if you're interested in gardening or nature, or nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, settle in. Enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we have something to say.
Hi, I'm Tim Kennelty.
And I'm Jean Thomas.
And welcome to Nature Calls, conversations from the Hudson Valley.
Today we have the opportunity to talk to Luke Vitagliano, PhD candidate, and get in on the ground floor of an exciting subject he's developing. Welcome, Luke.
Thank you for having me today.
Let me fill in a little bit of your accomplishments, which are really daunting. You're a wilderness first responder, and you do rock climbing and mountain biking. You're an experienced licensed professional counselor and licensed addiction counselor. So why don't you tell us a little more about yourself other than those highlights out of many, and how you got interested in your field, which is studying the impacts of nature on mental health.
Thanks, Jean. Thank you for having me here today. I really got interested in nature just when I was a little kid. My dad always used to take us up to our family property in the Catskills. Would love to just go spend time looking at tadpoles and walking around the property. Was a Boy Scout growing up as well, and really just loved to go camping and hiking with the team. And it was something that has just always been a big part of my upbringing. When I got to college, I really just loved to help people. I love talking with people like we're talking here today, and decided to pursue a career in counseling and really trying to help people and focus on improving their mental health. During my master's program, we would often go camping at this place by a waterfall, and it was spectacular. One of my most favorite memories in my master's program. And shortly before I graduated, a friend of mine who moved out to Colorado told me that I would absolutely love it out there. Went out to visit and moved there 4 months later. So I got to enjoy the pleasures of the Rocky Mountains and doing all the things that I love to do. While I was out there, I focused on working with kids in the juvenile justice system. And that's really what propelled me to go back to school to pursue a PhD, is noticing some of the systemic injustices within the system. And I thought to myself, maybe I could do something more and gain some research skills to be able to make some changes to the system. I won't bore you with all the details, but during my time at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro in my doctoral program, there came almost an epiphany or a pivotal shift in, I couldn't read any more articles about the criminal and juvenile justice system. And the one thing I kept talking to myself about and telling myself is, I just want to spend more time outside. This program is extremely demanding and I don't have as much time as I used to. And so ultimately I decided to make that shift and make that transition to study one of the things, being outdoors, spending time in nature, and how that impacts mental health, seeing how it helps other people. And so that's what got me to where I am today.
I love the concept of this, and your field is called nature-based mindfulness training. I feel like I'm doing this out there because I practice mindfulness and I'm also out in the garden. Is it mindfulness? Is it meditation? Tell us a little bit about the concept. I think it's so cool.
Yeah, so nature-based mindfulness training is actually an intervention that I created. And so nature-based mindfulness training kind of combines both mindfulness as well as some of the elements of nature that are really beneficial to human and mental health. And so it could sound like one and the same, but one of the big key differences in nature-based mindfulness training is that we're really intentional to integrate pieces of the natural environment in some of the curriculum that we provide to participants.
Who are your target audience? Is it this youth group that you were working with in the system, or is it like for everybody? What's your target?
So the beauty of it is the target audience really can be anybody. Nature-based mindfulness training, or NBMT, is really designed to be easily accessible to people. And the first group of people that we have tested nature-based mindfulness training on was college students with anxiety. And so I'm in the process now of wrapping up my dissertation study, and we had 37 participants in the study itself. Although the study was designed for and geared towards college students with anxiety, everyone seems to have stress and anxiety nowadays. The COVID pandemic has really led to an increase in recognizing, hey, there are some mental health concerns going on within our society, and we really need to address that. And so it's really flexible and adaptable to anyone that is struggling with stress or anxiety or other mental health concerns.
So is it a program? Is it something that you would teach or someone else would teach? How do you go about training people in terms of this particular concept?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of how we go about teaching it or training it, I'm in the process now of developing a train the trainer model in hopes to train other practitioners or other facilitators to run this group curriculum.
I love Train the Trainer. We used to do Train the Trainer. I just liked saying Train the Trainer.
Train the Trainer is a wonderful idea.
So, and can we get into like if you were training this group, which is, I think we definitely all have anxiety and stress, right? And and certainly during the pandemic, I know a lot of people, one of the big releases was they went outside for a walk, or they walked in a park or something like that. How do you even start? Could I do it myself? Could I start thinking about it myself without even having the training? What are the principles of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, we integrate nature and mindfulness. And so when we look at mindfulness, one of the kind of key points of mindfulness is attention, right? What are we paying attention to? Another key component is the intention, like the purpose behind it, or why are we doing this? And then our attitude, how are we doing this? Right. So those are some of the key elements of mindfulness. When you look at nature, there's something about being away or being outside where you're getting away from the day-to-day stressors that really are what's leading to an increase in stress and an increase in anxiety. Natural environments really bring about this sense of awe or fascination. And so by tapping into mindfulness specifically to highlight some of these characteristics in one's natural environment, that ultimately can lead to a decrease in stress and anxiety and feeling more connected to nature.
Okay, I'm the third grader in the room, so I get to ask the dumb questions. You talked about in some of the information you sent us that you are helping improve mental health with wilderness therapy. Now that phrase is really interesting to me. Like, is it like forest bathing or something? What is it?
Yeah, so when we look at, I'm going to start kind of broad and focus in a little more. So when we look at what we call nature-based health interventions, there are two major types of nature-based health interventions. The first type is interventions that are designed to change the environment. So one example would be if a developer is creating an office building, to design the building in a way that the windows are facing a more scenic area or a natural environment, to have some sort of vegetation or greenery within the building itself. So that's one big set of nature-based health interventions, is to change the environment. So a second big set of nature-based health interventions is to change people's behavior. Right? So using natural environments, using nature to alter or shift or change how people think, how people feel, how people behave. And so to get to wilderness therapy falls into that second piece where they're trying to change people's behavior. So one of the interesting things about wilderness therapy is it's been going on for decades in the United States, and wilderness therapy is not often accessible to people. One, you have to have a certain amount of time to be able to go into extremely remote areas of the country to be able to participate in this program. The second is they're extremely costly. Thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to be able to send someone out in the backcountry for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And so when we look at wilderness therapy, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that it is beneficial for adolescents, young adults that are experiencing mental health problems, depression, anxiety, substance use. But because it's inaccessible, because it costs so much and it takes so much time, it's hard to help the most amount of people. And so one of the things that I'm trying to do is how do we translate what's beneficial from wilderness therapy, what's beneficial from these nature-based health interventions that try to change people's behavior or their thoughts or their feelings. How do we make it more accessible? How do we take what works to be able to make it so that more people can have access to this?
So I have so many questions now. You've
Go for it. I've got a million.
Go for it.
So one of my questions is, we always say that our podcast is fun, but it's also science-based. So tell me, how do you measure whether somebody's anxiety has gone down? So you take someone out on this wilderness training and they come back. How do you know if you've been successful? What are the metrics around it?
There are a number of ways to measure anxiety. There is one major psychometric assessment called the Generalized Anxiety Disorder 7, where it's 7 items that people have to respond to, and they can rate on these items whether they experience these symptoms frequently, every week or two, infrequently, occasionally, or not at all. And so by administering these self-reported assessments, people can capture where they are in terms of some of the diagnostic criteria for generalized anxiety disorder. So that's one of many ways to be able to measure anxiety. And so when we look at measuring anxiety as it relates to taking people out on a hike or participating in nature-based mindfulness training, one of the interesting things that we did is actually track that over time. And so we administered nature-based mindfulness training to 3 groups of students, so 20 students in total. The average anxiety on a scale of 0 to 21 was about 10.2. And so that's kind of right in the middle of anxiety symptomology. That was at week 1. The participants received the intervention in between week 1 and 2. At week 5, the average score for anxiety across these participants was 4.6. So over a 50% decrease in anxiety symptoms for the students that received the intervention between weeks 1 and 2.
So what you're talking about is all self-reported. You're not taking people's blood pressure. It's not some kind of physiological thing. It's more about how that person is feeling and reacting and how they report that out, right?
Yes. So what I explained is just one of the ways to measure anxiety. So Tim, another way that you mentioned is to be able to take some of those biomarkers right after someone participates in some sort of nature-based intervention to see, does blood pressure decrease, right? Or do some of these other physiological symptoms, are they impacted by participating in some sort of intervention? And there is loads of research out there on the physiological impacts of spending time in nature, even just for a brief period of time. Anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes can help to reduce heart rate, blood pressure, and a number of these other physiological symptoms, as well as some of the mental health components, such as stress and anxiety.
On this one study, Luke, where you had weeks later, they had cut their anxiety in half, self-reported. Did you go back 6 months later and ask them again a year later? Or is this like still in process?
So we are in the process of actually wrapping up that research study. We actually collected that last piece of data in early November. So we're still 2 months out.
So that's still pending.
From post-intervention. So that's still pending. We don't have any plans now to be able to follow up with those participants. However, in the future, we are planning to run this intervention again and do it on a larger scale.
So, I mean, it's not, to me, it's not a surprise to me just anecdotally that when you go out in the natural world that your stress levels go down. I have stressed out. I'm sure Gene's stressed out. We're all stressed out at times. But if I'm going out in my garden or if I'm going out into nature, is there something else I can do besides tell me what a normal person, average person who's not taking this training, how can we apply this? Is it something that I take 15 minutes and I go out there and I make sure I pay attention to the bumblebees instead of doing my chores and putting the compost out? How do I apply mindfulness? Because I do mindfulness as well, but I don't do it outside. So how do I put those two things together if I'm just your average Joe who's listening today?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a number of different ways that you can go about really taking some of these principles and applying it to your everyday life. So one way that's coming to mind is, and I think you all are doing this now or promoting this now, is to create communities of people that are interested and want to spend more time outdoors. Because what we know is that by spending more time outdoors with others, that may lead us to feel more likely to go outdoors if we're not feeling we want to do so in isolation, right? So that's one way. Another way would be take gardening, for example. I know for me personally, when I'm doing some of these run-of-the-mill things that I'm just used to doing, I don't really do it with any thought or attention. It's really second nature. It's more of a chore. Rather than looking at it as more of a chore, be intentional. Focus on what you're doing. Feel your hands in the soil. Pay attention to your senses. What are you noticing that's going on around you? Whether it be a bird flying above your head or a hawk or an eagle, whether it be the breeze, feeling that against your skin, being really mindful or intentional to be mindful when you're participating in some of those run-of-the-mill tasks or chores that you already do on a regular basis outdoors.
I mean, I think it's a really good point, and I'm not going to be too facetious here, but it basically takes time to smell the roses, right? I mean, when you're outside, right? That's really what it is in a nutshell. I mean, and I'm going to be personal here. I myself, if I take a walk or if I'm out in the garden, many times I'm thinking about what am I doing next, or I've got a problem in the future, or you're really talking about taking a moment while you're out there to really experience what's happening at that very moment, right? That's really,
absolutely,
yeah.
and we're all subject to that. We all are thinking nonstop about what's coming next. What do we have to do? What tasks do we have to accomplish?
I'm getting
right?
anxious.
You're making yeah.
Well, and anyone who starts out practicing mindfulness, things may actually get worse before you get better. Because if you're taking a moment to stop and pay attention to what you're noticing, right, you may not like what you're noticing. It may not be something that is enjoyable or pleasant. And that's where some of the other pieces of mindfulness come in. How do we do this? We need to be non-judgmental towards ourselves. We need to be okay with not being okay. And by continued practice, by taking that walk 10, 15 minutes a day, right, being intentional to be present and be in the moment.
You're going to send us some really good links so that we don't send people off the edge.
Oh,
right?
yes, please, because I'm ready to
go.
go.
About mindfulness. I maybe this is a crazy question, but is the fact that there's climate change and environmental problems and things like that, I know a lot of people are coming to me and saying, what can I do? And is there something I should plant in my garden? Or is there something different that I should not have a lawn? actually focusing people on being more out there in nature? And is that helping? Does climate change have anything to? Are you studying that? Because that makes people anxious too, and yet there's something they can do about it. I mean, one of the things we always say is like, you as a gardener can have a big influence on the environment. Is that related to this?
In some respects. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm an expert in climate change, because I'm not. Climate change does bring about some stress and anxiety for folks. And just even noticing within the past 100 years, the infrastructure, industry, technology that has been built up has led to a number of remarkable abilities, right? We're able to sit here today and have this discussion and conversation via Zoom. And 20 years ago, we may not have been able to do this. And so while there's been this rapid acceleration of technological advances and infrastructure, sometimes we often put aside what's natural. And so one of the things that people might be able to do is really focus on grassroots efforts to influence legislation and influence changes, whether it be in your local community or whether it be on more of a national scale.
But if I'm doing that, I'm going to be getting anxious again. Okay, I've got a question. We have to finish up pretty soon. And Tim insists on finishing with something hopeful.
Oh, good. You're asking my hopefulness
I am
question.
asking your hopefulness question. There's a project you're involved in called Seek Your Summit. And I'm assuming that that's a direct addressing this whole genre. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Seek Your Summit is a practice or company that I started just last year. Is based in Colorado, where my fiance and I will be moving to here in less than a month. And Seek Your Summit is really designed to offer services that integrate mental health and nature. And so at this time, we're in the process of getting things off the ground, but we'll be offering a range of services to include like nature-based counseling services, nature-based clinical supervision to train counselors, coaching. Some of the things that we were able to get into last year was to put on some workshops and trainings. We had a university down here in North Carolina that I put on a nature-based mindfulness workshop for. And it was great to be able to take some of the elements of nature-based mindfulness training and put it into a brief wellness workshop, an hour workshop, to be able to get people outdoors and to get people to be able to focus on their mental health. And so Seek Your Summit really is designed to, how do we bridge that gap? How do we help people improve their mental health, whether it be through trainings or consultation efforts to work with companies or businesses that are noticing a rise in mental health concerns? How do we take this natural world and help others to benefit from it? We have all this science, we have all this data on spending time outdoors is beneficial for mental health. How do we implement this so that more people can benefit and more people can get outside?
So I just read a piece just this morning in the Times, I think it was the Times or the Washington Post, about worrying. It sounds like it was completely really, and how you can kind of tame your worrying. And one of the things it suggested was going out and taking a walk. Is that your advice, kind of on a parting note for us, that if we're anxious or we have, some anxiety, that a good thing to do is to get outside and try to pay attention to what's out there, whether we're taking a walk or looking at a tree, or is that the basics of what we should be thinking about?
Absolutely, right? If you have the ability to, and you can go walk outside, whether it be around the block, whether it be at a local park nearby, that is one great way to be able to de-stress. That is one great way to be able to help decrease any sort of anxiety that you might be feeling.
Well, I think that's a pretty good start, and it's pretty good hopefulness. About your Seek Your Summit that you're setting up, will there be rock climbing?
So as of now, we don't have any designs for rock climbing.
When you do, call me.
See that just the idea of you rock climbing, Gene, makes me very, very nervous. So
I love rock
I think I need to go take a walk now.
Tim's going to take a hike, Luke. Thank you for your time, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was great. Really, really interesting. Thank you.
We learned stuff.
And we can't wait to hear how this all develops. And I bet you anything, a couple of years from now, everybody's going to be talking about this.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for having me on today. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you all the best for 2023.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Luke.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Sandra Linnell and Devin Connolly from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgb@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Counties Facebook page. For more information about Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties, visit our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org or visit us in Hudson or in Acre. Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal programming and employment opportunities